The dog wouldn't stop digging in the one place the water barely touched. So why did the man start measuring it like a landing zone? Hold still. Caleb's voice cut low as gravel shifted under his boots. The dog's claws tore into dry earth again, faster this time, dirt hitting his legs in sharp bursts. Behind them, laughter cracked across the fence line. Caleb ignored it, pulling a tape across the creek, metal snapping tight in the heat. But the water, it wasn't flowing where it should, and the dog knew it. By the time the last of the snowmelt should have been running strong through the creek, it was already down to a thin, tired ribbon. The water moved slow over flat stones, barely making a sound, like it had forgotten what it was supposed to be. Dry grass leaned in from both sides, brittle and pale, the kind that snapped instead of bent. The Idaho highlands stretched wide and quiet under a washed-out sky, the air carrying that early heat that didn't belong this far north, not this time of year. Caleb Morgan stood at the edge of it, boots planted in the dust where mud should have been. He didn't move for a long time. Not because there was nothing to do, because he was watching. Atlas was already at work. The German shepherd had his front paws buried halfway into the bank, throwing dirt behind him in sharp, deliberate bursts. Not playful, not restless, focused. Each stroke landed in the same rhythm, like he had a job to finish and didn't care who was watching. "Hey," Caleb said, low. Atlas didn't stop. The dog shifted slightly, angled his body, and kept digging into the same patch of earth just above the waterline. A low sound rolled in his chest, not a bark, not quite a growl. A warning, maybe, or frustration. Caleb stepped closer, boots crunching gravel. He reached down and caught the dog lightly by the collar. "That's enough." Atlas froze for a second, then leaned back hard, resisting. His muscles locked under Caleb's hand. The growl deepened, not at Caleb, but at the ground, at that exact spot. Caleb let go. Atlas went right back to digging. Behind them, laughter broke across the field like a cracked branch. "Well, I'll be damned," a voice called out. "He's letting the dog pick the job now." Caleb didn't turn. He already knew who it was. Derek Shaw leaned against the fence line 50 yards back, one boot hooked over the bottom rail. He wore his cap tilted back, like he had all the time in the world. Two younger guys stood near him, one holding up a phone, already recording. "Get this," the kid said, laughing under his breath. "Man's out here letting a dog dig a hole like it's oil." Another laugh, louder this time. Caleb's shoulders stayed still. No reaction. No glance. Atlas hit something harder beneath the dirt. A dull, packed layer. The sound changed. The dog stopped for half a second, nose low, breathing in short pulls, then started again. More controlled now, scraping instead of tearing. Caleb watched. Not the dog, the ground. He crouched slowly, knees cracking faint under the weight. Reached down. Pressed his fingers into the loosened soil Atlas had turned over. Dry on top, cool underneath. He rubbed it between his fingers, then looked toward the creek. The water was low, too low, and moving wrong. Not straight through the bend like it used to. It dragged toward the bank where Atlas was digging. Subtle, but there if you were looking for it. A slight pull. A shift in direction that most people would miss. Caleb didn't. Behind him, Derek called out again. "What are you measuring, Caleb? Gonna build yourself a swimming pool?" More laughter. Caleb stood up without answering. Walked back to the truck parked under a dying cottonwood. Reached into the bed and pulled out a worn measuring tape, the metal edge scratched from years of use. Atlas paused, watching him. Then trotted over, dirt still clinging to his legs. Caleb walked back to the creek bank, set the tape down at the edge of the water, and pulled it tight across the narrowest part of the channel. He hooked it against a rock, stepped back, eyes narrowing slightly as he checked the line. 53 inches. He said nothing, just reached into his back pocket, pulled out a small, weathered notebook, and wrote it down. Atlas moved ahead of him, climbed a few feet upstream, then turned and looked back. Waiting. Caleb followed. They moved together along the bank, Atlas stopping every few yards, sniffing, circling once, then either moving on or planting himself again. Each time the dog lingered, Caleb stopped too. Measured. Wrote. From the fence line, the younger guy lowered his phone slightly. What's he doing? Derek shrugged, still smiling, but not as wide. Hell if I know, he said. Looks like he's laying out a damn runway. Another laugh, thinner this time. The sun shifted higher, bleaching the color out of everything. The creek kept moving slow, quiet, almost like it was trying not to be noticed. Caleb moved upstream one more time. Atlas stopped again. Same behavior, same focus. Dig, pause, sniff, dig. Caleb stood over the spot, watching the way the soil gave under the dog's paws, the way moisture held just beneath the surface even where everything else had gone dry. He looked down the length of the creek, then back at the field beyond it. Corn ground, low stretch. 80 acres that depended on rain that hadn't been coming right for years. Behind him, Derek called one last time. You planning on planting rocks this season, Caleb? No answer. Caleb knelt slowly, drove the tip of a metal stake into the ground where Atlas had dug, and pressed it down until it held. Atlas stepped back, breathing steady now, ears forward, watching the creek. Caleb stood there for a moment longer, eyes fixed on the thin line of water, then turned and walked back to the truck. He didn't look at the men at the fence, didn't acknowledge the laughter that followed him. Atlas stayed behind for a few seconds, staring at the spot where he had been digging, then turned and ran to catch up. The wind picked up across the dry grass, carrying dust instead of moisture. And in the shallow bend of that quiet creek, something had already started, long before anyone else could see it. By nightfall, the land went still in a different way. The heat didn't leave, it just settled closer to the ground, pressing into the walls of the small farmhouse like it wanted in. The boards creaked as they cooled, slow and uneven. Somewhere far off, a truck passed along the county road, its engine fading into the dark. Inside, Caleb Morgan sat at the kitchen table with the lights off. The only glow came from the window, thin moonlight cutting across the surface of the table, catching the edge of a stack of envelopes. Bank lettering, red ink on two of them. He didn't open them again. He already knew what they said. Atlas lay near the door, head down but not asleep. His ears shifted with every small sound. The click of cooling pipes, the faint rustle of grass outside, the distant bark of another dog miles away. Each noise got a reaction, small but precise. Caleb watched him for a moment, then leaned back in the chair, eyes half closed. It didn't last. A sharp metallic clang snapped through the night. Caleb was moving before the sound finished echoing. The chair tipped backward, hit the floor. His body dropped low, instinct taking over before thought had time to catch up. He rolled to the side, shoulder brushing the cabinet, one hand reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. Not here. Not in this house. His breath came short, controlled, eyes scanning. Door, window, angles. Atlas was already on his feet, not barking, never barking. He moved fast to the front of the room, placing himself between Caleb and the door, body angled, weight forward. Waiting. Listening. The silence stretched. Then came the follow-up sound, a loose piece of metal outside, swinging back into place against the side of the shed. The wind again. Just wind. Caleb stayed low a second longer, then another. His breathing slowed, inch by inch. The tension didn't leave all at once. It never did. It just loosened enough to move again. He pushed himself up, steady, and walked to the door. Atlas didn't move out of the way, just shifted slightly to the side, making space while keeping his position. Caleb opened the door. The night air came in dry and warm. The shed door hung half open, one hinge loose, tapping lightly with the wind. Same sound, same rhythm. Nothing else moved. No headlights, no voices, no boots on gravel. Caleb stood there a long moment, scanning the property the way he used to scan a perimeter. Slow, methodical, left to right, near to far, clear. He stepped outside anyway, walked the length from the porch to the shed, boots quiet against packed dirt. Atlas followed close, not ahead this time, staying just off Caleb's left side. The hinge had loosened. He tightened it without thinking, fingers working the metal like muscle memory from another life. Checked the latch twice before stepping back. Atlas circled once, nose low, tracing the ground. Then stopped. Same behavior. Same focus. Not at the shed, at the ground just beyond it. Caleb watched him, eyes narrowing slightly. "Not tonight," he said, quieter now. Atlas didn't argue this time. They went back inside. Caleb shut the door, locked it, then stood there with his hand still on the handle for a few seconds longer than necessary. When he finally moved, he didn't go back to bed. The bedroom sat dark down the hall, untouched. Instead, he pulled the chair back upright and sat again at the kitchen table. Reached for the notebook he'd used earlier by the creek. Flipped it open. Numbers filled the pages. Dates, measurements, notes written in short lines, no wasted words. He turned to a clean page, wrote the date, then paused. His pen hovered above the paper as something flickered at the edge of his mind. Light, white-hot against a dark sky. A flare. The sound came next, radio static breaking through, a voice cutting in sharp and fast. "Taking contact, north side, need..." The memory snapped off just as quickly as it came. Caleb's hand tightened around the pen. He didn't write what he'd almost written. Instead, he drew a line, then another. Rough sketch. The bend in the creek. The narrow point where Atlas had been digging. He marked it with a small X. Measured distance to the bank. Estimated drop. Direction of flow, what little there was. Atlas had settled again by the door, but he wasn't asleep. His eyes stayed open, watching Caleb as he worked. Outside, the wind kept moving through the dry grass. Hours passed without either of them speaking. At some point, Caleb stood and poured a glass of water. Drank half, left the rest on the counter. The envelopes stayed where they were. The house stayed quiet. Just before dawn, the sky began to lighten at the edges. Caleb stepped outside again, not because of a noise this time, but because he hadn't gone inside fully in the first place. Atlas followed, slower now. They walked back toward the creek without saying anything. The land looked different in that early light. Not better, just clearer. The thin line of water was still there, still dragging through the bend, still pulling ever so slightly toward that same section of bank. Atlas didn't wait this time. He moved straight to it. Stopped. Looked back at Caleb once. Then lowered his head and started digging again. Same place, same urgency. Caleb stood a few feet away, watching. No laughter this morning. No voices at the fence. Just the sound of paws cutting into dry earth. He stepped forward, planted his boot beside the disturbed soil, and looked down at the ground Atlas had opened up. The top layer was dry. Below it, darker. Holding something. Not enough to see, but enough to matter. Caleb exhaled slowly, then reached into the truck bed for the measuring tape again. This time, he didn't hesitate. The metal hook snapped against the first rock as he pulled the tape tight across the creek. The morning light was still thin, low enough to cast long shadows over the uneven bank. Caleb anchored one end with his boot and stretched the line toward the opposite side, eyes tracking the subtle dip where the ground narrowed. Atlas moved ahead, not wandering now, leading. The dog paused at the same cut in the bank, dirt already loosened from yesterday's digging. He stood there, still, head slightly tilted, ears forward like he was listening for something beneath the ground instead of above it. Caleb marked the measurement in his notebook without looking up. 53 inches yesterday, 52.5 today. The difference was small. Most men wouldn't notice. He did. Behind him, a truck door slammed. Gravel crunched under tires. Caleb didn't turn right away. He finished writing the number, flipped the page, and drew another line. This one longer, angled, mapping the bend upstream. Only when Atlas shifted his stance, body tightening slightly, did Caleb glance over his shoulder. Derek Shaw had come closer. Not at the fence this time, inside it. He leaned against one of the posts, arms crossed, hat pulled low enough to shadow his eyes. The two younger guys trailed behind him, slower now, less sure of themselves than the day before. "You start charging admission for this yet?" Derek called out. Caleb let the tape retract with a snap. Didn't answer. He moved 10 feet upstream, measured again. Atlas followed, cutting ahead, stopping where the ground sloped slightly inward toward the creek. Same pattern, same focus. The younger one with the phone, Ryan, raised it again, but not as high this time. "What are you even building?" he asked, half laughing. "A dam? Out of that?" Derek smirked. "Man thinks he's gonna hold water that ain't even there." That got a laugh, but it didn't carry like it had the day before. Caleb crouched, pressed his fingers into the soil at Atlas's feet. Same thing, dry crust, cooler underneath. He dug a little deeper with the edge of his hand. The dirt held together tighter here, packed in a way that told him something had been moving through it, even when it wasn't visible on the surface. Atlas stepped back to give him room, then circled once and sat, watching. Not the men, the ground. Caleb stood slowly, wiped his hand on his jeans, and walked back to the truck. He didn't rush, didn't react. That seemed to bother Derek more than anything else. "You hear me, Caleb?" he said, pushing off the fence post now. "You're wasting your time." No answer. Caleb reached into the truck bed, pulled out a length of old survey stakes, weathered wood, uneven at the ends. He grabbed a hammer next, the head dulled from years of use, and walked back toward the creek. Atlas stood with him. Derek watched. "What are those for?" Caleb drove the first stake into the ground where Atlas had dug, hard. The wood bit into the earth with a dull thud. He adjusted it, checked the angle, then hammered it down until it held firm. He didn't look up. Derek stepped closer, boots pressing into the dry grass. Not threatening, not friendly either. "You planning on telling anyone what this is?" Caleb set the hammer down, measured again from the stake to the opposite bank, then placed a second marker 10 feet upstream. "Or you just gonna keep scribbling in that notebook and pretend you're on to something?" Derek added. Caleb finally straightened. Not fully, just enough to take the pressure off his knees. He glanced once at Derek, eyes steady but unreadable, then looked past him, toward the fields. The corn ground sat quiet under the morning light, rows barely pushing through the soil. Too early to tell what kind of year it would be. Or maybe not. He turned back to the creek. Derek let out a short breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. "All right," he said. "You want to play it like that?" He tipped his head toward Ryan. "Keep filming. People ought to see this." Ryan lifted the phone again, but this time he hesitated before hitting record. Atlas stood up. Not aggressive, not tense, just aware. He stepped forward, placing himself between Caleb and the men, not blocking, just there. Close enough that Derek noticed. Their eyes met for a second. Dog to man. Derek looked away first. "Hell," he muttered, stepping back a pace. "Even the dog thinks it's serious." That got another laugh, but it didn't land the same. Caleb drove the third stake into the ground, then the fourth. Each one marked a line across the creek, subtle at first, but beginning to form a shape if you stood far enough back to see it. A narrowing, a hold point, something that didn't belong to the natural flow of the land. Derek watched it happen, watched long enough that the smile faded. Not completely, just enough to show something else underneath. "You really think this creek's gonna dry up?" he asked, quieter now. Caleb didn't answer. He checked the alignment of the stakes one more time, adjusted the middle one by a fraction, then stepped back. Atlas followed his gaze, both of them looking at the same thing. The weak line of water, the bend, the pull toward the bank. Derek shook his head. "It's been running every spring since my dad's time," he said. "Same as yours." Still no answer. Caleb picked up the hammer, slung it into the truck bed, and closed the tailgate with a solid click. The sound echoed across the dry field. Final. Derek stood there a moment longer, then turned, heading back toward the fence line. The younger guys followed, quieter now, the phone lowered at Ryan's side. Halfway back, Derek stopped, didn't turn around. "Hope you're right," he said, almost under his breath. Caleb didn't respond. He climbed into the truck, started the engine, and let it idle for a few seconds before pulling away. Atlas jumped into the passenger side without being told. As the truck rolled past the fence, Caleb kept his eyes forward. Didn't look at Derek. Didn't look back at the creek. But in the side mirror, just for a second, the line of stakes cut across the shallow bend like something that had been drawn there long before any of them noticed. And out on that dry stretch of land, where men had always trusted the sky to decide their year, one man had started marking a different kind of line. One that didn't depend on rain. Not anymore. By mid-morning, the heat had already settled into the ground like it meant to stay. Caleb parked the truck near the edge of the creek and cut the engine. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It carried weight. Dry wind moving through tall grass. The faint ticking of metal cooling. Somewhere far off, a hawk circled, its shadow sliding slow across the field. Atlas was out of the truck before the door fully opened. He didn't run this time. He moved with purpose, straight to the line of stakes, nose low, retracing the path they had marked. He stopped at the first one, sniffed, then moved to the next. By the third, he slowed, circled once, then sat, watching the bank where the soil dipped inward. Same place. Caleb reached into the truck bed and pulled out a length of old steel bar, the kind used for prying rock. It was heavy, worn smooth where hands had held it over years of work. He balanced it across his shoulder, then grabbed a coil of rope and a rusted shovel. No machine, no help. Just weight and time. He stepped down into the creek bed, boots crunching over dry stones. The water slid past his soles in a thin, quiet line, barely enough to wet the leather. Atlas followed him down but stayed just behind, watching every movement. Caleb planted the steel bar under the edge of a flat limestone slab embedded in the bank. He tested it once, shifting his weight, feeling for the give. There was some. Not much. He adjusted his stance, 1 foot forward, 1 back, body angled. Same posture he used to use when bracing under load, when things had to move whether they wanted to or not. He pushed. The stone resisted at first, then shifted with a dull crack, breaking loose from the packed earth. Caleb held the pressure steady, didn't rush it. Let the weight do the work. Atlas moved closer, circling the slab, keeping clear but alert. The stone tipped. Caleb caught it with both hands, lowered it carefully to the creek bed. It hit the ground with a heavy thud, sending a small ripple through the thin water. He stepped back, breathing slow, controlled. Didn't rush to the next one. He studied the placement. Then bent, adjusted the stone by a few inches, turning it until the flat edge faced upstream. He pressed it down into the soft layer Atlas had exposed the day before. It settled. Not perfectly, but close. Atlas stepped forward, sniffed along the edge, then moved to the side and scratched lightly at the dirt where the stone met the bank. Caleb watched, then crouched and packed the loosened soil tighter around the base, using both hands, pressing it in firm. The first stone held. He stood there for a moment longer than needed, looking at it. Not much to anyone else, but it was a start. From the road, a truck slowed as it passed. Didn't stop. Didn't need to. Word had already started moving. By noon, the sun sat high and harsh, burning the color out of everything. Sweat ran down Caleb's back, soaking into his shirt, but he didn't take a break. He moved from one stone to the next, working the bar under each slab, prying, shifting, dragging them into place. Each one took time. Each one mattered. Atlas stayed close, moving ahead sometimes, stopping where the ground changed, where the bank dipped, where the soil held more than it should. He would stand there, still, until Caleb caught up. Once, halfway through the afternoon, Atlas froze. Head low, ears forward. A sound Caleb hadn't heard yet. He stopped moving, didn't speak, just watched the dog. Atlas took 2 slow steps forward, then barked once, sharp, controlled. Caleb moved immediately, circling wide instead of straight in, eyes scanning the ground. There. A coil of dull brown near the base of a rock. Water snake. Blended perfectly into the dry edge of the creek. It shifted as Caleb approached, head lifting slightly. Atlas stayed where he was, body tense, but not advancing. Caleb grabbed a long branch from the bank and nudged the snake away from the work area. It slipped into the thin water and disappeared downstream without a fight. He tossed the branch aside and looked at Atlas. "Good catch," he said, voice low. Atlas's ears twitched once. Then he turned and walked back to the line of stones, like the interruption had never happened. By late afternoon, the first row began to take shape. Not a wall, not yet. Just a line of stone cutting across the narrowest part of the creek, each piece angled slightly into the current, each one seated into the ground with care. Caleb stepped back and looked at it. The water touched the edge of the first stone and shifted, just slightly, redirecting around it. Small change, but real. He wiped his hands on his jeans and reached for the notebook again. Measured the height, marked the placement, calculated the gap between stones. Atlas lay down nearby, watching the water, not the man. The wind picked up again, carrying dust across the field. From the fence line, a figure appeared. Not Derek this time. Ryan. He stood there for a moment, unsure whether to come closer. Then he did. Slow steps. Careful. He stopped a few yards back from the creek. "Hey," he said. Caleb didn't look up. "Yeah?" Ryan shifted his weight, glancing at the stones. "You really building a dam?" Caleb drove another small stake into the ground beside the line. "Something like that." Ryan let out a short breath, not quite a laugh. "Ain't much water to hold." "No," Caleb said. Ryan nodded, like that confirmed something. He stood there a second longer, then turned and walked back toward the road. Didn't film this time. Didn't call out. Just left. As the sun dropped lower, the light softened, turning the dry field gold instead of white. Caleb placed one more stone before stopping. His hands were slower now, not from weakness, but from knowing when to stop before mistakes happened. He stepped back from the creek, climbed up the bank, and looked down at what he'd done. A line. A beginning. Atlas stood beside him. They both watched the water move. It wasn't much, but it changed. Just enough to notice. Caleb turned, headed for the truck. Atlas followed. Neither of them looked back right away, but the stones stayed, set into ground that had already started holding something more than it had the day before. And out there, under a sky that wasn't giving anything away, the first part of the work was no longer an idea. It was real. The next morning came earlier than it should have. Caleb was already outside before the sun cleared the ridge, coffee untouched in his hand, eyes fixed on the creek. The air still held a trace of night cool, but it wouldn't last long. It never did anymore. Atlas moved ahead of him, cutting through the tall grass in a straight line toward the stones. No hesitation, no wandering. Same path, same job. Caleb followed slower, watching not just the dog this time, but the ground under his feet. The faint depressions. The subtle dips where water used to run heavier, where it had carved the land over years no one had bothered to measure. Atlas reached the creek and stopped at the far end of the stone line. Not where they started. Somewhere new. He lowered his head, sniffed once, then pawed at the ground. Short, controlled strokes, not digging yet, just testing. Caleb stopped a few steps back, waited. Atlas shifted slightly to the left, pawed again, then dug. Harder this time. The soil broke quicker here, looser. Caleb moved in, crouched, pressed his hand into the disturbed patch. Cooler than the rest. Not just below the surface, deeper. He dug with his fingers, pushing past the dry layer, down into the darker soil. It clung together when he squeezed it, held shape, held moisture. Atlas stepped back, watching. Caleb looked at the creek. The water wasn't flowing straight anymore. It touched the first line of stones and leaned, just a little, toward this new spot Atlas had opened. He didn't smile, didn't react outward at all. But something in his posture shifted. He stood, grabbed the shovel from the truck, and went to work. This section took longer. The ground here resisted differently, not hard, but dense, layered, like it had been holding something in place for a long time. Atlas stayed close, moving only when Caleb moved. Every time Caleb paused, the dog adjusted position, rechecking the area, sometimes scratching lightly where the soil seemed wrong, like he was correcting something Caleb couldn't see. By mid-morning, a shallow trench had formed along the inside edge of the stones. Nothing deep, just enough to guide. Caleb stepped back, studying the angle. Adjusted one of the stones by a few inches, packed the base tighter. Atlas circled once, then stopped directly behind the stone Caleb had just moved. He sniffed the ground, then pressed one paw down firmly beside it. Caleb watched, then nodded once, almost to himself. "All right." He added more soil, tamped it in, sealing the gap. The water shifted again. Still weak, still quiet, but different. From the road, another truck slowed. This time it stopped. Derek didn't get out right away. He sat there, engine idling, watching through the windshield. No grin now. No call-outs. Just watching. Caleb didn't acknowledge him. Atlas did. The dog's head lifted slightly, ears angling toward the truck. He didn't move, didn't react beyond that. Derek finally opened the door and stepped out. He walked halfway to the fence, then stopped. "Looks different," he said. Not loud, not joking. Caleb kept working. "Water's moving," Derek added. Caleb nodded once, still not looking up. "Yeah." Derek stood there a moment longer. "Still don't see how you're going to hold enough to matter." Caleb drove the shovel into the ground, turned another layer of soil, and said, "Not trying to hold all of it." That was the first full sentence he'd given him. Derek noticed. "What then?" Caleb straightened, wiped his hands, and finally looked toward the creek instead of the man. "Just enough." Derek followed his gaze. The line of stones, the shallow trench, the way the water leaned, subtle but there. He didn't laugh, didn't agree either. Just stood there, thinking. Behind him, the younger guys stayed in the truck this time. No phones out, no jokes. Atlas moved again. Upstream, faster now. He climbed the bank a few feet, then cut across the slope, nose working, tracking something invisible. He stopped near a cluster of rocks half buried in the grass. Dug once, twice, then looked back. Caleb hesitated, only for a second, then grabbed the bar and followed. The ground up here was different, higher, drier on the surface. But when Atlas broke through, the soil beneath carried that same darker tone, same density. Caleb drove the bar under the first rock and leaned his weight into it. The stone shifted easier than expected. He rolled it free and dragged it down toward the creek. Atlas moved ahead again, already choosing the next spot. By noon, the second layer had started. Not a wall yet, but something more than a line. A shape was forming now, one that directed, not blocked. Angled into the current, forcing what little water there was to gather, slow, and settle. Caleb worked without pause. Atlas worked with him. The sun climbed higher, burning the air dry, but Caleb didn't stop to rest. He moved stone after stone, each one placed with care, each one adjusted by inches until it fit the pattern only he seemed to see. And Atlas kept finding it first, every time. Derek stayed longer than he meant to, long enough to notice that the dog wasn't guessing, long enough to realize Caleb wasn't either. When he finally turned back toward the truck, he didn't say anything else, just got in, drove off slower than he'd arrived. By late afternoon, the creek looked different. Not fuller, not stronger, but organized. The water no longer wandered across the bed. It followed the line Caleb and Atlas had built, pooling slightly at the base of the stones before slipping through the gaps Caleb had left on purpose. He stood there at the edge, hands on his hips, breathing steady. Atlas came to stand beside him, both of them looking at the same thing. Not what was there, what could be. Caleb reached into his pocket, pulled out the notebook, and wrote another line, then closed it. For the first time since he started, he didn't look tired. He looked certain. Atlas sat down in the dirt, chest rising slow, eyes fixed on the water. Not watching it move, watching where it would go next. The air changed before anything else did. It wasn't the temperature, not yet. It was the stillness that came with it, the kind that pressed down on the land, flattening sound, making every movement feel louder than it should. Caleb noticed it halfway through setting the next layer of stone. He paused, one hand resting on the rough edge of a slab, and looked up. Atlas had already stopped. The dog stood 10 yards upstream, body angled slightly away from the creek, head low. Not focused on the water this time. Something else. Caleb didn't call out, didn't move right away. He watched Atlas instead. The dog took one slow step forward, then another. Careful, measured. Not hunting, not playing. Tracking. Caleb set the stone down where it was, not fully placed, and reached for the steel bar leaning against the bank. He didn't pick it up yet, just kept it within reach. Atlas moved again, this time faster. He slipped into a patch of brush where the grass grew thicker along the bank, disappearing for half a second before the sound came. A sharp snap. Then a low, sudden yelp that cut through the quiet like a blade. Caleb was already moving. He didn't think, didn't hesitate. His boots hit the dry ground hard as he closed the distance, pushing through the brush with his shoulder. The steel bar came up in his hand without him remembering grabbing it. Atlas stumbled back out of the grass. One front leg held off the ground, blood already running down into the dust. Caleb dropped to a knee in front of him. Easy. The word came out low, steady, controlled. Atlas didn't pull away, didn't panic. He stood there, breathing fast but quiet, eyes locked on Caleb's face. Caleb's hands moved automatically. He slid his fingers along the leg, ignoring the blood at first, feeling for structure. Bone, joint, movement. No break. Good. He turned the leg slightly. The cut was deep, not clean. Edges torn, not sliced. Wire. Old. Rusting. Hidden under the grass. Caleb's jaw tightened. He glanced back toward the brush. Didn't go looking for it. Not yet. Atlas shifted slightly, trying to put weight down. Caleb stopped him with one hand. Don't. The tone changed just enough. Command. Atlas froze, held still. Caleb reached behind him, grabbing the edge of his shirt, tearing a strip free with a quick pull. He pressed it against the wound, firm but controlled. Blood soaked through almost immediately. He adjusted the pressure, changed the angle, then pulled another strip loose, wrapping it tight around the leg just above the cut. Atlas flinched once. Didn't make a sound. Caleb tied it off, then sat back on his heels for a second, watching the bleeding slow. His breathing had changed. Not fast, not uneven, just deeper, more deliberate. The kind that came after contact. The kind that stayed for a while. Atlas lowered himself carefully to the ground, front leg still lifted slightly. Caleb placed a hand on his shoulder. Not petting, not comfort, just contact. "I got you." The words stayed quiet between them. The wind picked up again, pushing through the grass, carrying the dry scent of dirt and something older beneath it. Caleb looked back toward the creek. The stones sat where he'd left them, half finished, water still moving through the gaps, unchanged. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't go back to work. Atlas watched him, waiting. Caleb exhaled slowly, then stood. "Come on." Atlas didn't get up right away. Caleb reached down, slid one arm under the dog's chest, supporting the injured leg, and lifted. Atlas was heavy. Always had been. Caleb adjusted his stance, shifted the weight against his body, and carried him up the bank. Each step measured, controlled. He didn't rush, didn't stumble. The same way he'd carried worse, in other places, under other skies. The truck door opened with a creak. Caleb set Atlas carefully on the passenger seat, making sure the leg stayed elevated. The dog shifted once, then settled, breathing steady now. Caleb closed the door, walked around to the driver's side, and stopped. Just for a second. His eyes drifted back toward the creek, toward the unfinished line of stone, toward the place Atlas had led him to, the place that mattered, the place he was leaving behind, for now. The memory came without warning. Heat, noise, a voice over the radio cutting in and out. "Stay on position, stay..." Then silence. Caleb blinked. The image broke. He opened the truck door and got in. The engine turned over on the first try. He didn't look back again as he pulled away. The drive to the house was short, felt longer. Dust followed the truck in a thin cloud that hung in the still air. Inside, Caleb cleared the kitchen table in one motion, pushing the envelopes aside without reading them. Atlas stayed where he was until Caleb opened the door, then climbed down slowly, favoring the injured leg but steady. Caleb guided him inside, set him down near the center of the room where the light was better. "Stay." Atlas stayed. Caleb moved fast now, not rushed, focused. He pulled the bandage loose, checked the wound again under clearer light. The bleeding had slowed, but the cut ran deeper than he liked. He cleaned it with water first, then alcohol. Atlas's muscles tightened under his hands. No sound, just tension. Caleb worked through it, steady, precise, the same way he had years ago when stopping meant losing something that couldn't be replaced. He wrapped the leg again, tighter this time, cleaner. Secured it, checked circulation, waited. Atlas lowered his head to the floor once it was done. Not asleep, just still. Caleb sat back in the chair across from him. For the first time since the morning, he didn't move. The house stayed quiet. The wind tapped lightly against the walls. Outside, the creek kept moving, thin and unnoticed. Inside, Caleb's eyes stayed on the dog. The work out there could wait. For now. For the first time since he'd started, the line of stones didn't matter most. Atlas did. And out on that dry stretch of land, where something had begun to take shape, the cost of it had just shown itself. Not in numbers, not in measurements, in blood. The next few days passed without the sound of stone. The creek kept moving the same way it had. Thin, quiet, barely there. But Caleb didn't go back to it. Not yet. Inside the house, the light shifted from morning to afternoon and back again, tracing slow lines across the floor. The air stayed warm, thick enough to carry the faint smell of antiseptic and dust. Atlas stayed near the center of the room. He didn't pace, didn't whine. He just watched. Caleb checked the bandage twice a day. Once in the morning, once at dusk. Each time the same pattern. Clean hands, steady pressure, careful eyes. The wound held, not closing yet, but not worsening either. Good enough. On the third day, Atlas tried to stand before Caleb gave the word. His weight shifted forward, testing the leg. Caleb saw it from across the room. Not yet. The tone stopped him. Atlas froze mid-step, then eased back down without argument. The house stayed quiet again. By the fifth morning, the wind had changed direction. It came in from the south now, hotter, drier. It carried no smell of rain, no hint of moisture from anywhere beyond the ridge. Caleb noticed that before anything else. He stepped outside just after sunrise, leaving Atlas inside for the first time since the injury. The dog didn't follow. Didn't need to. Caleb stood on the porch and looked out across the land. The grass had shifted color. Not all at once, just enough. A duller shade. Less green, more gray. The kind of change you only saw if you'd been watching for it. He walked out toward the creek alone. The line of stones sat exactly where he'd left them. Unmoved, unbroken. The shallow trench had held its shape, guiding what little water there was into a narrow, controlled path. Caleb stepped down into the creek bed and crouched near the first stone. He placed his hand in the water. It was cooler than the air, but not by much. He followed the flow with his eyes, watching the way it leaned into the structure, pooling slightly before slipping through the gaps he'd left. It wasn't much, but it was enough to measure. He pulled out the notebook, flipped to the last entry, compared the numbers. The level had dropped. Not fast, but steady. He wrote it down anyway. No reaction. Just data. From the road, a truck passed. Didn't slow, didn't stop. People had already decided what this was, or what it wasn't. Caleb stood there a while longer, then climbed back up the bank. When he returned to the house, Atlas was waiting at the door, not lying down anymore, standing, weight balanced carefully, favoring the injured leg but not avoiding it completely. Caleb opened the door. Atlas stepped outside. One step, then another. Testing. The leg held. Not strong, but usable. Caleb didn't say anything. He just watched. Atlas moved slowly across the yard, then stopped and looked toward the creek. The same look. The same focus. Caleb shook his head once. Not today. Atlas stayed where he was, but he didn't lie back down. That afternoon, Caleb went back to the creek. Atlas followed this time, slower, keeping pace just behind him. They moved without speaking. The sun climbed high again, pulling what little moisture remained out of the ground. At the creek, Caleb picked up where he left off. Same tools, same rhythm. The first stone took longer than it should have. Not because it was heavier, because his hands paused more, checking, adjusting, listening. Atlas stayed just outside the work area. He didn't dig this time, didn't lead. He watched. Every few minutes, he shifted position, checking the bank, the water, the line of stones. Guarding. Caleb noticed. Didn't comment. By late afternoon, the second layer had been extended further across the creek. The structure held more of the flow now. Not visibly, not to anyone passing by. But Caleb could see it in the way the water slowed before moving on. In the way the soil along the inner edge darkened slightly, holding moisture longer than it had before. He measured again, wrote it down. Atlas limped forward, stopping at the original dig site. He lowered his head, sniffed, then pawed lightly at the ground. Not digging, just checking. Caleb watched him, then walked over and pressed his hand into the soil again. Still holding, still cooled beneath the surface. He nodded once, more to himself than anything. From the fence line, a figure stood watching. Not close, not calling out, just there. Derek. No smile this time, no phone. He stayed for a few minutes, then turned and walked back toward his truck without saying a word. Caleb didn't follow him with his eyes. He stayed focused on the ground, on the water, on the numbers. The days moved like that. Work, measure, adjust, repeat. The sky stayed empty, week after week. No storms, no clouds worth naming. The creek thinned further. The surrounding fields began to show it. Leaves curled tighter during the hottest part of the day. Color faded. Subtle at first, then not. By midsummer, the difference could be seen from the road. Most fields carried a dull, uneven green, patches already turning toward yellow. Caleb's lower ground held its color longer. Not bright, but alive. Atlas walked the edges of it in the evenings, moving slow, checking the boundaries like he had learned something about the land that Caleb hadn't needed to explain. One afternoon, Ryan stopped again. This time he didn't bring the phone. He leaned against the fence, watching the field, then the creek. "Your place looks different," he said. Caleb kept working. "Maybe." Ryan hesitated. "Rest of us ain't looking so good." No answer. Ryan nodded once, like that was enough. Then he left. The first dry summer didn't break anyone. Not yet. It didn't have to. It just showed the edge of what was coming. And out there, in the narrow bend of a creek most men had stopped thinking about years ago, something small had already begun to hold. Not enough to matter. Not yet. But enough to notice. If you knew where to look. By the time August settled in, nobody had to look that hard anymore. The land started telling the truth on its own. It showed up in the way the wind carried dust instead of scent. In the way boots left prints that didn't fade by morning. In the way the creek, what was left of it, stopped pretending to be anything more than a line of moving glass over stone. Caleb saw it early. Others felt it later. Derek heard it first. The pump behind his barn had always made a steady, low hum, background noise that blended into everything else. It ran mornings, afternoons, sometimes late into the night when the heat pressed too hard on the fields. That sound changed. Not all at once. It thinned. The pitch shifted slightly, like a voice losing strength. Then, one afternoon, it cut out completely. Derek stood there beside the well casing, one hand resting on the metal pipe, listening to nothing. He turned the switch off, then on again. The motor clicked, struggled, then fell silent. He didn't say anything, didn't call anyone over. He just stood there longer than he should have, staring at the ground like it might answer him. Across the property line, Caleb was already moving. He had woken before first light, the same way he always did, but something had been off. Not a sound. The lack of one. No distant pumps. No engines kicking on in the early hours. Just wind. He stepped outside and stood still for a moment, scanning the horizon without moving his head. Old habit. Letting the eyes do the work. Nothing obvious, but enough.
Atlas came up beside him, pressing lightly against his leg. Not anxious, just present. Caleb nodded once, more to himself than the dog.
All right.
They walked down to the creek together. The structure had grown over the weeks, no longer just a line of stones, but a low, angled barrier that shaped the water instead of fighting it. The shallow basin behind it held more than it had before. Not deep, not wide, but stable. Caleb stepped into the water, boots sinking slightly into the cooler sediment. He crouched and checked the flow where it met the first stone. Still moving, still holding. Atlas didn't go to the dig site this time. He moved along the edge of the basin, tracing the perimeter slowly. He paused at one section, nose low, then stepped back, ears tightening. Caleb saw it immediately. He moved to the spot, dropping to one knee. At first glance, nothing. Then he saw the shift. A darker line of moisture cutting through the packed soil near the base of the stone. Not visible unless you were looking straight at it. A leak. Small, but enough. Caleb didn't swear, didn't react outward. He just set his hand against the ground and felt the dampness spreading under the surface. Atlas let out a short bark. Sharp. Caleb was already moving. He grabbed the shovel, dug fast but controlled, exposing the weak point. The soil here hadn't compacted enough. The angle of the stone had left a gap beneath it. He drove the steel bar under the edge, shifted the weight slightly, then packed fresh soil into the void, pressing it down hard with both hands. Atlas stayed close, pacing just outside the work area, eyes scanning the surroundings like something else might come with the problem. Caleb worked until the seep slowed, then stopped, watched, waited. The water held. For now. He leaned back, breathing steady. Atlas came forward, sniffed the repaired section, then stepped back again, satisfied. No words passed between them. None needed. From the road, a truck approached faster than usual. It didn't slow until it reached the fence line. Derek got out before the engine fully died. He walked halfway across the field, then stopped. Didn't cross the creek. Didn't call out right away. When he did, his voice sounded different, lower. Tried the pump again this morning. Caleb didn't look up. Nothing. Still no answer. Derek took a few more steps forward, boots crunching dry dirt. Dropped 6 feet last week, he said. Figured it'd level out. Caleb stood slowly, wiping his hands on his jeans. Didn't. Derek nodded once. The movement was small, measured. Caleb walked to the edge of the structure and looked down into the basin. The water sat just below the top layer of stone, holding steady. Atlas stood beside him. Derek followed his gaze. For the first time, he wasn't looking at Caleb. He was looking at the water. "How much you holding there?" he asked. Caleb didn't answer right away. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the notebook, flipped to the latest entry, checked the numbers. "Enough?" Derek let out a breath, not a laugh, not even close. "Mine's gone," he said. The words didn't carry weight like a complaint, just fact. Caleb nodded once. No surprise, no sympathy spoken out loud. Derek shifted his stance, looking back toward his own fields. From here, the difference was clearer. His land had started to fade faster, leaves curling tighter, color thinning. Across the creek, Caleb's lower ground still held. Not perfect, but alive. Derek turned back. Eyes moved from the water to the stones, to the dog. Atlas held his ground, watching him without blinking. "You really think this holds?" Derek asked. Caleb met his gaze for the first time that morning. "Not forever." Derek nodded, then looked back at the basin. "Long enough?" Caleb didn't answer. He didn't have to. The wind picked up again, pushing across the dry field, carrying nothing with it. Derek stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked back to his truck. Slower this time. No laughter, no questions, just distance. Caleb watched him go, then turned back to the creek. Atlas had already moved upstream again, checking the edges, making sure nothing else had shifted. Caleb followed. The structure held, for now. But the land around them had already started to give up. And this time, it wasn't going to stop at a warning. Not this year. Not anymore. The sky stayed empty. Days passed without clouds worth noticing. The kind that showed up in the morning and burned off by noon didn't count. The kind that rolled in high and thin didn't count either. Nothing that held, nothing that broke. The land tightened under it. By the second week, the difference wasn't subtle anymore. Corn leaves in the neighboring fields had started to curl in on themselves, folding tight by midday, opening only halfway at dusk. The color shifted from green to something duller, almost gray at the edges. Dust followed everything. Boots, tires, wind. Caleb saw it all without needing to go far. He walked the length of his lower ground every morning before the sun climbed too high. Same path, same pace. He ran his hand along the leaves as he moved, feeling the texture change. Checking. Reading. Atlas walked ahead, slower now than before the injury, but steady. The leg held. The scar had closed enough to carry weight again, though he favored it when he thought Caleb wasn't looking. He always noticed. They reached the creek just as the light hit the water. The basin had dropped. Not much, but enough. Caleb stepped down into it, boots sinking slightly into the cooler mud. He checked the line where the water met the stones. The flow had thinned again, but the structure still held the shape, still forced the water to gather before slipping through. He knelt, measured, wrote. Atlas moved along the edge, checking the perimeter like he had every day since the repair. He paused once, ears tightening, then relaxed when nothing followed. Clear. For now. Caleb stood and looked out across the fence line. Derek's field sat quieter than it should have. No movement, no engine, no pump. Just stillness. He turned back to his own ground. The difference held, not dramatic, not from a distance, but close enough. You could see it in the way the plant stood upright instead of folding in the way the soil still held shape when pressed instead of breaking apart. Enough. That word again. By midday, the heat pressed down hard enough to flatten sound. Caleb worked through it anyway. He moved along the stones, checking each one, tightening where needed, adjusting the flow in small ways that added up over time. Atlas stayed close, never far, always watching. The truck came just after 3. It didn't slow at the road, didn't idle at the fence. It drove straight in. Caleb heard it before he saw it. The engine cut too quickly, door opening before the dust had settled. He didn't turn right away. He finished packing soil against one of the lower stones, then stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. Atlas had already turned. The dog's posture shifted, not aggressive, not defensive, but alert, focused on the movement. Derek walked toward the creek without stopping. No hesitation this time, no fence line between them. He stopped 10 feet away, close enough to see the water clearly, close enough to feel it. Neither man spoke at first. The silence sat heavy between them. Derek's eyes moved across the structure, the stones, the basin, the way the water gathered, then past it, to Caleb's field, then back again. "I lost the back 40 yesterday," he said. The words came flat, no edge, no frustration, just fact. Caleb didn't respond. Derek nodded once, like that confirmed something he already knew.
"Front's going the same way." He shifted his weight slightly, hands resting on his hips, then dropping to his sides. "I ran the numbers." Caleb glanced at him briefly, then back to the water. Derek took another step forward, closer now. "I don't have enough to carry it through," he said. No anger, no pride in the tone. Just something stripped down to what it was. Caleb stood still. Atlas didn't move. Derek looked at the basin again, watched the water sit there, steady in a way nothing else was. "I need water." The words hung there, unfinished. Derek exhaled slowly. Just enough to save something. That was the closest he came to asking. He didn't look directly at Caleb when he said it. His eyes stayed on the water. Caleb let the silence sit. He didn't answer right away. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the notebook, flipped it open. His thumb traced down the last few entries: levels, flow rates, estimates. Numbers. Always numbers. He looked at the basin, then at his own field, then back at Derek. Atlas shifted slightly, stepping closer to Caleb's side. Not blocking, just there. Caleb closed the notebook. "There's enough for about 80 acres, he said. Derek nodded once. He knew that already. "I can spare some," Caleb added. Derek's shoulders tightened slightly. "How much?" Caleb looked past him toward the dry stretch of field beyond, then back to the basin. He didn't rush the answer. 20. Derek's jaw moved slightly, like he was running the math again. It wasn't enough to save everything. It wasn't supposed to be. He nodded anyway. "That'll do." Caleb didn't move. Derek looked at him then, really looked. For the first time without anything in the way. "I'll pay you," he said. Caleb shook his head once. "No." Derek frowned slightly. "I'm not asking for, I know." The word cut him off, not sharp, just final. Caleb glanced toward the creek again. I'll run a line to your side, he said.
Have it moving by Thursday. Derek stood there a moment longer. Something shifted in his face. Not gratitude, not relief. Something heavier, something harder to hold. He nodded once. All right. He turned to leave, took 2 steps, then stopped, didn't turn back. I was wrong, he said. The words came out low, barely carried, but they landed. Caleb didn't respond, didn't need to. Derek walked back to the truck, got in, drove off slower than he'd arrived. The dust settled behind him. Atlas stayed beside Caleb, watching the road until the truck disappeared. Then he looked back at the water. Caleb followed his gaze. The basin sat steady, for now. But something had shifted. Not in the ground, not in the structure, in the space between men. And for the first time since the work had begun, no one was laughing anymore. Caleb didn't wait for the next day. He started that evening. The light was already dropping behind the ridge when he walked the line from his basin toward Derek's fence. The ground between them wasn't flat. It never had been. It dipped and rose in shallow waves, shaped by years of runoff that never stayed long enough to matter. Now it had to. Atlas moved ahead, slower but steady, nose working close to the ground. He stopped often, checking the slope, the direction, the feel of the soil under his paws. Caleb followed, carrying the shovel over one shoulder and the steel bar in his other hand. No notebook this time, no measuring tape. He didn't need them. The line had already been drawn in his head. He paused at the first dip, studying the grade. Water didn't argue. It followed the path that asked the least from it. He drove the shovel into the dirt and began cutting a shallow trench. Not deep, just enough to guide. Atlas stepped to the side, watching. Every few feet, Caleb stopped, checking the angle with his eyes, adjusting the cut by inches. Not rushing, not guessing. The same way he'd once moved through terrain that didn't forgive mistakes. By the time the sun dropped fully, the first stretch of ditch had taken shape. Rough, incomplete, but moving in the right direction. Caleb stood at the edge of it, breathing steady, sweat cooling against his back. Atlas limped forward and stepped into the trench, testing it. He followed the line a few yards, then stepped out and looked back. Caleb nodded once. Yeah. They worked until the light was gone, then stopped. The next morning came harder. The sky hadn't changed, still empty, still holding nothing back. Caleb stood at the basin before starting, watching the water level. He didn't need the notebook. He could see it. Lower than yesterday. Not by much, but enough. He turned toward his field, walked the rows slowly, ran his hand along the leaves. They still held, still stood upright. But the soil underneath told a different story. It gave just a little less under his boots. He stood there a moment longer than needed, then turned back toward the ditch. Atlas was already waiting. They worked through the morning without speaking. The trench extended yard by yard, cutting a line across the dry ground toward Derek's side. Each section had to hold its shape, had to carry water without losing it to the thirsty earth around it. Caleb packed the edges tight with his hands, pressing the soil down, sealing what he could. Atlas stayed close, checking ahead, doubling back when something felt off. Once he stopped short, a small rise in the ground that would have broken the flow. Caleb saw it, adjusted the line, cut around it instead of through. The trench held its grade. The sun climbed higher. The heat pressed harder. By midday, the air shimmered above the dirt. Caleb slowed, not from fatigue, from calculation. He walked back to the basin again, checked the level. Lower. Still holding. But now there was a second demand on it. He stood there, staring at the water, then at his field, then at the unfinished ditch. Atlas came to stand beside him. The dog didn't look at the water. He looked at Caleb, waiting. Caleb exhaled slowly. The memory came without warning. Heat, dust, a radio voice cutting through static. "We can't hold both. Pick one." The rest didn't need to play out. It never did. He blinked once. The present came back. Same choice, different ground. He stepped into the basin and moved to the lowest section of his own field line. The small channel he had carved to feed his crops. The one that had kept them alive this long. He knelt and drove the shovel into it. Not to deepen, to break. The soil gave way under the blade. Water shifted, pulled toward the new line, toward Derek's side. Caleb didn't stop. He widened the cut slightly, guiding the flow into the trench he'd been building. Atlas moved closer, watching the change. The water hesitated for a second, then followed. A thin stream at first, then steadier. Caleb sat back on his heels, eyes tracking the movement. His field would feel it, soon. He knew exactly how much. He didn't look at it. Not yet. Atlas stepped into the new flow, standing over it, feeling the water pass around his paws. He followed it a few yards down the trench, then stopped and looked back. The line held, for now. Caleb stood slowly. His hands were steady. His breathing wasn't. He walked back toward his field, just far enough to see the first row where the water had pulled away. The soil there darkened less. The leaves above it shifted slightly, not yet curling, but not as firm as they had been that morning. Caleb watched, long enough to confirm it, then turned back. He didn't linger, didn't second guess. The decision had already been made. Atlas fell in beside him as he returned to the ditch. They worked the rest of the day shaping the line, making sure the flow reached the fence. By late afternoon, the first trickle crossed onto Derek's side. Barely visible, but there. Caleb stood at the boundary, watching the water slip into land that had been dry for too long. Derek appeared before sunset. He didn't come fast this time. He walked. Stopped when he saw the water. Didn't step closer right away. He just stood there, looking at it like he wasn't sure it was real. Then he crossed the last few yards, knelt, pressed his hand into the wet soil, held it there. When he stood again, he didn't say thank you, not out loud. He didn't need to. He looked at Caleb once, then at the ditch, then back toward his field. "I'll carry it from here," he said. Caleb nodded. "That's the idea." Derek hesitated, then added, quieter, "You're cutting into your own." Caleb didn't answer. Derek looked past him, toward Caleb's field. He saw it, the shift, the beginning of it. He didn't comment, didn't apologize again. He just nodded once more, then turned and walked back, already thinking about what needed to be done next. Caleb stood there a moment longer, Atlas beside him. The water moved, thin, controlled. Not enough for both, but enough to choose. And out there, where the land had stopped giving anything freely, The hardest part of the work wasn't the building. It was the letting go. The change showed up the next morning. Not in the creek, in the field. Caleb walked the lower rows the same way he always did, boots moving slow, hand brushing along the leaves. The air felt thinner, hotter even before the sun climbed. He stopped halfway down the first stretch. The difference was there. Subtle, but real. Leaves that had stood firm now bent just slightly at the tips. The soil beneath his boot pressed down a fraction more before holding. Not failing, not yet, but giving. He didn't stay long. He had already seen enough. When he reached the creek, Atlas was waiting at the edge of the basin. Not lying down, not resting, standing, watching the water. Caleb stepped beside him. The level had dropped again, faster now. Not because the creek had changed, because the demand had. He crouched, dipping his fingers into the water, feeling the temperature, the movement, the pull. Still holding, but tighter. Atlas shifted, not toward the basin, upstream. Caleb noticed immediately. The dog moved without looking back, cutting along the bank toward the place where it had all started. The original dig. Caleb stood for a second, then followed. The ground there hadn't changed much to the eye. Still dry on the surface, still scattered with the same stones, the same brittle grass. Atlas stopped at the spot, lowered his head, sniffed once, then began to dig. Not the frantic digging from before. Controlled, precise. Each stroke placed. Like he was reopening something that had been covered. Caleb stepped in beside him and dropped to a knee. Easy. Atlas didn't stop. Caleb let him work. The soil gave quicker this time. The top layer broke apart, revealing the darker earth beneath. The same color, the same density. But this time, Caleb didn't stop at the surface. He took the shovel and drove it in deeper, cutting through the compacted layer Atlas had exposed. 6 inches. 8. 10. The ground changed. He felt it through the handle before he saw it. Resistance shifted. Not harder, softer, holding. He dug again and again, then paused. The soil at the bottom of the cut held shape when he pressed it, more than before. He reached down, scooped a handful, squeezed. It stayed. Moisture. Not surface runoff. Not what the creek carried. Something underneath. Caleb sat back slightly, eyes narrowing. Atlas stopped digging, stood still, watching the hole. Caleb looked at the creek, then back at the hole, then at the line of stones. The shape started to form. Not fully, but enough. He dug a little wider, exposing more of the layer. The ground here sloped differently. Subtle, barely noticeable. But it directed something beneath the surface toward this point, toward the bend, toward the place Atlas had chosen before any of it made sense. Caleb exhaled slowly. The memory came again. Not loud this time, not sharp, just a voice. Read the ground before you move. He blinked once, then looked at Atlas. The dog stood over the hole, chest rising slow, eyes fixed on the dark soil beneath them. Not reacting, not guessing, knowing. Caleb stood, walked a few feet downstream, then back again, tracing the line in his head. The creek, the stones, the basin, and now this. A feeder. Small, hidden, but steady. He didn't say anything, didn't write it down. Not yet. He moved back to the basin instead, checked the level again. Still dropping. But now he saw more than just the surface. He saw where it came from, where it could be held, where it could be guided. Atlas followed him down, stepping carefully along the edge. Caleb adjusted one of the stones near the inner curve, widening a narrow gap by less than an inch. The water shifted. Just slightly, but enough to pull more from the upstream side, from the direction of the dig. He watched it, waited. The flow didn't increase. Not visibly, but it stabilized, held longer before slipping through. Caleb nodded once. Not satisfaction. Recognition. From the road, a truck slowed again. This time, Derek didn't get out. He watched from the driver's seat, eyes moving between the basin and Caleb's field. Then he drove on. No words. No need. Caleb stood there for a long moment, Atlas beside him. The dog's tail moved once, slow, then still again. Caleb looked back upstream, at the hole, at the place where this had started, where Atlas had stopped digging long enough for him to see. He walked back to it one more time, kneeling beside the exposed ground. He placed his hand flat against the damp soil, held it there, then pulled it away. The moisture stayed. Not much, but enough. He looked at Atlas. The dog met his gaze. No command, no expectation, just presence. Caleb let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I didn't see it," he said, quiet. Atlas didn't move. Caleb looked back at the creek, at the structure, at the line he had built. All of it started here. Not with the plan, not with the measurements, with the dog. He stood. The pieces fit now. Not perfectly, but enough to move forward. Enough to hold. And out there, where everything else had started to fail, the thing that made the difference hadn't been the design. It had been what someone else noticed first. By the time the next week turned over, the land had stopped pretending. Fields beyond the creek had gone from struggling to surrendering. What had once been rows now looked like lines of dust, broken by brittle stalks that leaned more than they stood. The color had drained out of them completely. No one needed to measure anymore. You could see it from the road. Caleb didn't drive the road. He stayed on his ground. He moved between the creek and the field in the same steady pattern, checking the basin, adjusting the stones, then walking the rows that still held. Atlas followed him every step. The limp had settled into something permanent now. Not slowing him down, just shaping the way he moved. One leg slightly shorter in the rhythm, but never out of place. They worked without speaking. They didn't need to. The basin had dropped again, but slower now. Not because the sky had changed, because the system had. The upstream cut where Atlas had first dug had been widened just enough to feed the flow beneath the surface into the basin. Caleb had adjusted the angle of 2 stones and sealed another gap along the north edge. Small changes, but they added up. The water stayed longer. Not much, but enough. Derek's ditch had taken shape on the other side of the fence. Cruder, less controlled, but moving. The thin stream Caleb had sent across now split into 2 smaller channels, spreading across Derek's lowest ground. It wasn't saving everything. It wasn't supposed to. It was saving something. That was the difference. On a quiet morning, Derek walked over without the truck. No dust, no engine, just boots on dry ground. He stopped at the fence first, out of habit, then stepped over it without asking. Atlas watched him come, ears forward but relaxed. Caleb stood at the edge of the basin, hands resting lightly on his hips. Derek looked at the water, then at the stones, then at the dog. "I started mine," he said. Caleb nodded. "Seen it." Derek shifted his weight slightly. "Not like yours." Caleb glanced at the ditch across the line. "It doesn't have to be." Derek followed his gaze. The water moved through his sides slower, less certain. But it moved. "That enough?" he asked. Caleb looked at the field beyond, the small patch still holding color, still upright. "For now." Derek nodded. They stood there a moment longer. No tension this time. No space left between them. Just land and work. Later that afternoon, Ryan came back. Not with a phone, with a shovel. He didn't say much when he reached the fence, just lifted it slightly. "Mind if I take a look?" Caleb stepped aside without answering. That was enough. Ryan crossed over and walked the line of stones slowly, studying them, then moved upstream toward the dig site. He stopped there, looked down at the darker soil, then back at Caleb. "This where it starts?" Caleb nodded once. Ryan knelt, pressing his hand into the ground the same way Caleb had. He felt it. Same way. He stood back up, eyes shifting between the creek and the field. "I didn't see it," he said. Caleb didn't answer. Atlas did. The dog stepped forward, stopping beside the spot, looking down, then back at Ryan. Not telling him, showing him. Ryan let out a quiet breath, then walked back to his side of the fence without another word. That evening, Caleb stood at the edge of the basin as the light dropped low across the land. Atlas lay beside him, front paws stretched forward, head resting between them. The water moved the same way it had all day, thin, steady, holding. Caleb reached into his pocket, pulled out the notebook, and flipped it open. He didn't write right away. He looked at the earlier pages, the first measurements, the first marks, the place where it had all started. Then he turned to a blank line, wrote the date, paused, then added one more line beneath it. Flow holding. He closed the notebook. The wind moved across the field, carrying less dust now from the strip that still held. In the distance, another figure walked along a fence line. Someone else watching. Someone else thinking. It wouldn't stay just his. It was never meant to. Atlas shifted slightly, settling deeper into the ground, the old scar along his leg catching the last of the light. Caleb looked down at him, then back at the water. A long moment passed. Then footsteps approached from behind. Light. Careful. A boy's voice. "How'd you know where to build it?" Caleb didn't turn right away. He kept his eyes on the basin, on the line of stones, on the place where the water gathered. Then he glanced down at Atlas. The dog didn't move, didn't look up, just stayed where he was, watching the water the way he always had. Caleb looked back at the boy and said simply, "I didn't." The wind moved again. The water held. And in a place where most things had already given up, something small stayed behind. Not loud, not perfect, but steady. The kind that lasts. If you made it all the way here, I want to ask you something simple. Would you have trusted the land or the dog? Comment 1 if you believe Caleb did the right thing. Comment 0 if you think he took too big a risk. I read every single comment. And if this story meant something to you, go ahead and subscribe. There are more stories like this waiting. Real, quiet moments that most people miss until it's too late. I'll see you in the next one.